Man, just when you thought you were done farming, FGO slaps us with another event. Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here, bringing you a servant spotlight for the servant whose outfit somehow leaves less to the imagination than just being naked, Erice. We'll be examining her stats and skills as well as going over pointers on how to utilize her effectively and an overall grade comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. So if you're a big fan of the side boob, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring my bell so that you can catch all of these spotlight videos as they go up and you can help out the channel. But for now, on to Erice's stats. Erice has a max HP of 11,991 and a max attack of 9,122, which becomes 9,578 due to her Lancer class modifier. Compared to other Lancers, her HP is about average, while her attack falls a bit on the low side. However, she fares much better when compared to the general population of 4 stars, where she has above average HP and pretty decent attack. When it comes to her command cards, Erice has 4 hits on her quick, 3 hits on her arts card, 3 hits on her buster card, and 5 hits on her extra card. She has an NP gain rate of 0.63% and a star rate of 12%. Erice has strong star generating and NP gain, due in large part to her arts and quick focus deck, as well as her high hit counts. Overall, her stat spread is exceedingly average, but well balanced, which positions her as a good all-rounder. Taking a look at her skills, Erice's first skill is Dread Spirit Peacekeeper rank A. It increases her arch card effectiveness for 3 turns between 20 and 30% depending on level, and it also grants her 2 hits of evasion for 3 turns. Erice's second skill is Der Freshoots rank B. It ignores evasion for 1 turn and increases her own star absorption for 1 turn between 300 and 600% depending on level. And finally, her last skill is Grim Reaper rank B. This skill increases her own instant kill success rate for 3 turns between 50 and 100%. It increases her crit damage for 3 turns between 20 and 30%, and it increases her damage against servant enemies for 3 turns, also between 20 and 30%, all depending on level. For her passives, Erice has Magic Resistance Spirit rank B+, which increases her debuff resist by 10% and further increases it by 20% against undead enemies. She also has Riding rank C+, which increases her quick card effectiveness by 7%, Independent Action rank B, which increases her crit damage by 8%, and Divinity rank E, which increases her damage by 100. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, Erice has an Arts Quick deck with Quick Arts Buster and an Arts Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Ame no Sakahoko, which is an AoE arts attack that deals damage to all enemies with between a 450 and 750% damage modifier depending on level. It also removes all defensive buffs from enemies, and it has between a 30 and 80% chance of instant killing them depending on overcharge. Now, despite being a welfare servant, you shouldn't expect any mercy from Erice's Ascension mat requirements. As usual for welfare, she just needs 4 copies of the event-specific item, in this case the Astrolobes for Ascension, which you can get simply by completing the Requiem event. But things take a turn for the worse when you look at her skill mat requirements. Erice is going to need 36 bones, 12 lanterns, 60 stakes, and 20 arrowheads per skill. That's right, she's going to need stakes and bones. Where is your god now? But either way, bones can be farmed at Fuyuki XC or XG, the former being more AP efficient, but the latter having a much higher 63% drop rate. Lanterns have a 40% drop rate at Kutha in Babylonia, stakes have a 67% drop rate at the Gallows Hill in Salem, and arrowheads drop at God Skyboulder Ruins in Lost Belt 4, where they have a 40% drop rate. Unfortunately for Erice, when it comes to gameplay, nothing really sticks out about her, as opposed to her character design, where there are a couple of things that really stick out. Her stats are about as average as an SR servant can get, with no real strength in either defense or offense. However, she does have exceptional NP gain and star generating, which does help her out and gives her some nice utility, which is a good thing because a large portion of her kit revolves around her Noble Phantasm and crit damage potential. Her first skill, Dread Spirit Peacekeeper, increases her arch card effectiveness for 3 turns and grants her 2 hits of evasion. The arts buff is fairly strong, and since it lasts for 3 turns, it also has good uptime. It allows Erice to get even better returns on her NP gain and spam out her Noble Phantasm easily. And while pairing a good steroid skill with a hard defensive skill is usually a bad thing in FGO, it works in Erice's case because her evasion is a strong pseudo protection from arrows, so she doesn't really lose any defensive utility when using the skill offensively since the evade stays active for so long, which allows her to take full advantage of the skill both offensively and defensively whenever it's activated. And while on the subject of evasion, Erice also has a hard counter against evade in her second skill, Der Freischütz, which grants her 1 turn of sure hit and star absorb. The sure hit is niche, but it can come in handy for some challenge quests, especially since a good amount of archers have evade, but 99 times out of 100 you're going to be using this skill for the star absorb. The star weight buff is pretty huge, and it can almost guarantee a big turn of crit damage if you use it right before a brave chain. Erice has no issue making stars on her own either, so she can even set herself up for the skill. But the icing on top that really makes the skill good, and in turn makes Erice a viable crit lancer, is the remarkably short cooldown of just 4 turns, which means that Erice can get multiple uses out of the skill in most battles, if you choose to build around it. But believe it or not, crit damage isn't Erice's only niche. She also has a strong instant kill ability in her aptly named third skill, Grim Reaper. This skill gives Erice a massive 100% increase to her instant kill success, along with a modest buff to crit damage, and a bonus damage modifier against servant enemies. There's a lot to tackle with this skill, but starting from the crit angle, a 30% buff to crit damage, while not a lot, does give Erice a little bit of extra oomph on her crits. And if you can get off an arch crit, it'll be significantly more powerful due to Erice's first skill. The servant damage buff is also a significant boost in power for Erice, especially in boss battles. 30% is deceptively strong on a special modifier like this, because it actually scales multiplicatively with other common damage modifiers like attack and arts up, so in a practical sense, Erice will always hit a lot harder than her buff numbers indicate. Finally, the instant kill up does pair well with her Noble Phantasm for taking out weaker mobs of enemies. Skill priority for Erice should be her arts buff first for the damage, followed by Grim Reaper for even more damage, and then the star absorb last. And her only append skills worth taking are mana loading and extra attack up. Erice's Noble Phantasm is an AoE arts attack that removes all defensive buffs from enemies and has a chance to instant kill them. Now, while it may seem like Erice is built to be a servant who should focus on instant death effects, similar to Nitocris, that actually isn't entirely the case, and looking at her that way kind of obfuscates her true value. While Erice can certainly be effective for instant killing small enemies, it's largely redundant since at NP5 she deals enough damage to kill weaker enemies anyway. The far better aspect of her Noble Phantasm lies in the defensive buff removal. This is an AoE buff removal that can get rid of things like invincibility, guts, evade, and even card resistances on all enemies. Furthermore, Erice's Noble Phantasm gain is good enough to where she can easily spam her NP, which gives her access not only to good AoE damage, but consistent buff removal. This combined with her strong defensive utility from her evade, makes her surprisingly strong for challenge quests and boss fights. And remember, she also has an anti-servant modifier and comes free at NP5, so her damage isn't insignificant against enemy servants, especially if you build her with a crit focus and you can get good art crits in, which not only result in higher burst damage, but also feed into Erice's Noble Phantasm spam by filling her gauge faster. On the other hand, however, Erice ironically struggles with farming. Despite her good NP gain and instant death mechanic, she lacks a pure NP charge skill, which limits her turn 1 wave clear, and the instant death effect actually hurts her looping since it triggers before damage. So for example, if Erice's death triggers on an enemy, that means that she receives less NP refund, which makes her a wildly inconsistent farmer, and her instant death more of a demerit rather than a benefit. Also, while her extra damage mod against servants does help her a good deal against bosses, her base NP damage is extremely low against non-servant enemies. Even with the buff, she's not going to outshine more dedicated DPS servants. So in some cases, she's going to be better used for utility rather than damage. As for team comp, Erice is built to thrive in arts teams, specifically with allies who can buff her NP gain or who can provide her with crit damage, like Tamamo, Caster Gil, and Mozart. Tamamo's arts buff along with her skill cooldown reduction can elevate Erice's damage while also giving her much more access to her Star Absorb, whereas Gil and Mozart not only buff Erice's Arch card effectiveness, but are also excellent crit supports. Gil with his massive buff to Star generating, and Mozart with his Star Bomb. Erice's Bondcraft Essence is Caldron Simone, which increases the party's quick and Arch card effectiveness by 10%. For the most part, you're better off just giving Erice craft essences that boost Arch card effectiveness and crit damage, like Sign of a Smiling Face, Another Ending, Painting Summer, or Gem Magecraft. In the future, Ocean Flyer is another great CE to pick up for Erice, because it boosts Arch card effectiveness, NP damage, and gives starting NP charge, along with full attack stats. As for command codes, crit boosting codes like Gakyo no Fude are good for her, especially if they buff Arch crits or increase Star Absorb on Arch cards. Overall, Erice is a unique servant in that she provides a lot of value that isn't immediately evident at first glance. Rather than an instant death focused farmer like Nitocris, Erice excels particularly in challenge content and boss battles, where she can make use of her powerful buff removal while also delivering solid anti-servant damage. She can also work well as a crit DPS in Arch teams due to her low cooldown Star Absorb and self-sufficient Star generating. On the other hand, despite being an AoE servant, she does struggle with farming consistently due to that lack of an NP charge and counterproductive instant death effect. And even with her plethora of buffs, she isn't exactly going to usurp any of the high tier DPS servants. Still though, she is better than I think many people will give her credit for, so she gets a B+ for me. The buff removal on her NP does do a lot of the heavy lifting for her, so if you have a better buff remover like Amakusa, then Erice won't be quite as useful, but for most players, she might be your best source of buff removal in boss fights. Plus, even if you already have a top tier challenge quest servant, Erice can still fit into most team comps and provide much more utility while still dealing good damage. And those are my thoughts on Erice. She's a pretty good all-around Lancer that makes for a good addition to any Chaldea. Unfortunately though, she often goes overlooked, probably because she was released between two absolutely broken welfare Lancers in Kagetora and the upcoming Summer U. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over on our Discord, follow us on Twitter, and chill with us on Twitch, all linked in the description down below. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.